Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Brazil, former Vice President Michel Temer has assumed power as interim president after the Senate removed President Dilma Rousseff and began impeachment proceedings over accusations she tampered with accounts in order to hide a budget shortfall. Rousseff has called the move a coup and vowed to fight it. On Thursday, she said the impeachment trial is a threat to Brazil's sovereignty and its constitution.
Esta condição, na condição de presidenta.
The condition of a president who was elected by 54 million people, to whom I say now, right now, at this decisive moment for Brazilian democracy and for our future as a nation, what is in play in the impeachment process isn't just my mandate. What is in play is the respect of the polls, the sovereign will of the Brazilian people, and the Constitution.
The attempt to oust President Rousseff has sparked massive protests across Brazil. On Thursday, dozens of women chained themselves to the gates of Brasilia's Planalto Palace in support of Rousseff. Protester Fatima spoke out.
The coup leaders in Brazil are trying to get President Dilma out and are usurping our democracy. They will only get us out of here by force because we are defending democracy and the elected mandate for more than half of Brazilians.
We'll go to Rio de Janeiro to speak with Intercept reporter Andrew Fishman after headlines. The Obama administration sending out letters to school districts across the United States saying students have the right under federal law to use the bathroom that corresponds with their gender identity. The directive is not legally enforceable, although it does suggest school districts could face lawsuits or loss of funding if they fail to protect transgender students from discrimination and unequal access to facilities. This comes only days after the Justice Department sued North Carolina over its anti-transgender law, HB 2, which bars transgender people from using the bathroom that corresponds with their gender identity. It also invalidates local ordinances aimed at protecting LGBT people from discrimination. Pope Francis says he'll establish a commission to study whether women could serve as deacons in the Roman Catholic Church. Research suggests women widely served as deacons in the Church's early history. In response to the Pope, the Women's Ordination Conference said, quote, opening a commission to study the diaconate for women would be a great step for the Vatican in recognizing its own history, they wrote. In Washington, D.C., House Speaker Paul Ryan's opposition to presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump appears to be fading after the two met on Capitol Hill Thursday. The two issued a joint statement saying, quote, while we were honest about our few differences, we recognize there are also many important areas of common ground, end quote. This comes as an increasing number of Republican Party leaders are choosing to back Donald Trump, despite the candidate's controversial proposals, which include deporting 11 million undocumented immigrants and building a wall across the entire length of the U.S.-Mexico border, which experts have said is not feasible. Meanwhile, the Secret Service says it'll investigate Donald Trump's former butler over a Facebook post in which he referred to President Obama as a, quote, Kenyan fraud and called for him to be hanged. Anthony Senecal worked for Donald Trump for nearly 30 years. Trump's campaign has said it disavows Senecal's statements. In Iraq, ISIS militants have killed at least 20 Iraqi soldiers and tribal fighters in suicide attacks near Ramadi. Meanwhile, in Baghdad, gunmen and suicide bombers killed 13 people when they stormed a coffee shop in a town north of Baghdad. No one's claimed responsibility for the attack. It comes on the heels of a wave of suicide attacks in the capital that killed at least 93 people on Wednesday. Meanwhile, in Syria, fighting's broken out in a suburb north of Aleppo where a temporary ceasefire between the Assad regime and opposition groups has expired. Before the ceasefire took effect Monday, Aleppo had been the site of intense fighting this month, including an airstrike on an MSF-supported hospital that killed at least 14 patients and 3 doctors, including one of the city's last pediatricians. On Thursday, Aleppo resident and mother Mayada Nazrian spoke out about finally deciding to leave Aleppo.
وقت أنا وصغيرة بحلب I have been in Aleppo since I was a little girl. I got married and had my kids here. We've suffered through this war for 5 years. We've been patient for a year, 2 years, 3 years. We've lost a lot. We lost the martyr, we lost our work, we lost everything we own because of this war.
We'll have more on the ongoing conflict in Syria and how Syrians are organizing in the midst of war with scholar Yasser Munif later in the broadcast. In Somalia, a U.S. airstrike killed 5 people Thursday. The Pentagon says the 5 were militants with the extremist group al-Shabaab. It's the most recent U.S. airstrike inside Somalia, including a series of April drone strikes that killed at least 8 people and another in March that killed 150. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has admitted at least 25 U.S. soldiers have been stationed inside Libya at 2 separate outposts since late 2015. It's the latest sign of U.S. military escalations in Libya. A former member of the 9/11 Commission is calling on the Obama administration to declassify 28 pages of the congressional report on Saudi ties to the 2001 terrorist attack. John Lehman, the Navy secretary in the Reagan administration, says he believes there's evidence some Saudi government officials offered support to the 9/11 hijackers. Saudi Arabia was home to 15 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11. A federal judge has ruled against a section of President Obama's health care law, finding the administration overstepped its authority in subsidizing deductibles, copays, and other cost-sharing measures. The suit was brought by House Republicans who've unsuccessfully sought to repeal Obama's health care law. The suit argues the subsidies were unconstitutional because Congress had already rejected requests for this funding in 2014. The Obama administration's expected to appeal. In Alabama, the execution of death row prisoner Vernon Madison has been halted after his attorneys argued dementia has left Madison unable to understand his death sentence. He was convicted of killing a police officer in 1985. In a 4-4 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court stayed the execution Thursday night, only hours before Madison was scheduled to die by lethal injection at the Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore. Later in the broadcast, we'll go to Holman Correctional Facility to cover another issue there, a 10-day work strike by prisoners protesting severe overcrowding, poor living conditions, and the use of unpaid prison labor. And we'll try to go behind bars to speak with a prisoner in solitary confinement who helped lead the strikes. Meanwhile, Alabama's Governor Robert Bentley has signed into law a measure banning abortion clinics from operating within 2,000 feet of kindergarten through 8th grade public school. It's the same rule applied to sex offenders in Alabama. The law will force at least 2 clinics in Alabama to close. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, known as ICE, is reportedly preparing to launch a month-long campaign of raids specifically aimed at rounding up and deporting undocumented Central American mothers and children. The effort contradicts the Obama administration's 2014 pledge to focus deportations on, quote, felons, not families. On Thursday, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio wrote, quote, I am outraged to read reports of future ICE raids planned for May and June targeting Central American mothers and children. Many of these families have fled violence in their home countries and seek safety here in the city of immigrants, unquote. Google has announced it'll ban advertising by payday lenders from its site. It's the company's first global ban on a whole category of financial products. Advocates argue that payday lending is an exploitive industry that traps low-income people in cycles of debt. And in France, more than 50,000 people took to the streets Thursday, blockading roads and barricading schools as the French government narrowly survived a vote of no confidence in the National Assembly over President François Hollande's controversial labor reforms. Opponents of the bill were about 40 votes shy of the 288 necessary to defeat the reforms. The controversial labor reforms were forced through 2 days ago using a little-used power. The proposals have sparked massive protests by students and unions across France. The movement has been dubbed Nuit debout, or Rise Up at Night. On Thursday, Philippe Martinez, Secretary General of the CGT union, spoke out.
The most important thing is what the people are feeling. There hasn't been any dialogue with the unions because the bill was imposed on us, and democracy has once again been brushed aside at the National Assembly. I think that for a government that talks a lot about dialogue, about debate, well, they're showing us what their idea of dialogue is. Let's move by force. Let's try and scare workers and the young and the people. They should look at the polls because over 70% of the people in this country are against the bill.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.